30 years in his life, Jackson Wells had never feared death, until today. The crack of gunfire echoed through the narrow canyon as a bullet whizzed past his face, so close he felt its heat. Time slowed. His wife Emily's smile flashed before his eyes. That same smile from the worn daguerreotype he kept in his saddlebag. Then his boy Samuel's laugh. For the first time in years, Wells feared dying. Not because he was afraid, but because he'd finally found something worth living for. Blood soaked the left shoulder of his weathered denim shirt, turning the blue fabric a dark crimson. Wells pressed his back against the boulder, Colt Peacemaker firm in his grip. The pain only sharpened his focus. "Give it up, Wells!" a voice shouted from behind the rocks 20 yards ahead. "You ain't making it out of this canyon alive." Wells checked his wound. Clean through, painful but not fatal. He'd survived worse during the war between the states. "That deed belongs to Mr. Blackwood," another voice called out. "Hand it over and we might let you ride away." Wells took a deep breath. 20 years of survival had taught him when to rush and when to wait. He counted 3 distinct voices. 3 men sent to kill him for a piece of paper. A hat appeared from behind a rock formation. Without hesitation, Wells squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. The first shot knocked the hat skyward. The second found its owner. 1 down. The second man made a desperate dash between cover. Wells tracked him, leading his target just enough. The bullet caught him mid-stride, spinning him to the ground with a scream that echoed off the canyon walls. "Damn you, Wells!" The third man's voice cracked with panic. Wells recognized that voice. Pete Sims, one of Victor Blackwood's hired guns. The knowledge sent ice through his veins. If Blackwood was involved, this wasn't just about the gold mine deed in his saddlebag. Sims fired wildly, emptying his revolver in desperation. Wells waited for the telltale click of an empty chamber, then stepped out from cover. 1 clean shot to the man's shooting arm dropped him howling to the dust. "Who sent you?" Wells demanded, approaching the wounded man. Blood pulsed between the fingers Sims had clamped over his wound. "You know damn well who," Sims spat, eyes burning with hate and fear. "Blackwood wants what's his." "It ain't his," Wells replied, checking the man's pockets. He found a folded paper with Blackwood's distinctive wax seal, proof of what he already knew. Before Wells could press further, Sims lurched up with a hidden knife. Wells sidestepped, drew his hunting knife from his belt, and ended the threat with 1 decisive thrust. For a moment, Wells just stood there, blood dripping from his blade. 3 years ago, he might have felt something. Now he simply wiped the knife clean on Sims' jacket. With expert hands, Wells tore strips from his bandana and packed his wound. Not the first bullet he'd taken. There had been that Gettysburg morning in '63, and later that Comanche raid in '70. The night he'd nearly ended everything with his own gun, too drunk and too broken to see any path forward. Wells retrieved his horse from where he'd left it when the shooting started. His shoulder throbbed as he opened his saddlebag to check its contents. A leather portfolio containing the deed to the Yellow Sky mine, and beside it, that worn photograph of Emily and Samuel. He touched the image briefly, tracing their faces with a blood-stained finger. "Still keeping my promise," he whispered to the silent image. Then he mounted his chestnut mare with a grimace and pointed her toward home. "Come on, Belle," he muttered. "Let's make it back before sundown. Got a feeling today's trouble is just beginning." Wells approached his ranch cautiously as the last light faded from the sky. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Something was wrong. The front door of his cabin stood ajar, and Brutus, his cattle dog, wasn't barking his usual greeting. Dismounting with his peacemaker drawn, Wells tied Belle to a hitching post and moved silently toward the house. A quick glance through the window showed his main room had been searched. Drawers pulled out, cabinets standing open. "Brutus?" he called softly. A whimper from the barn answered him. Gun first, Wells pushed open the barn door, ready for anything. Brutus limped toward him, favoring his right front leg, but otherwise unharmed. Beyond the dog and the dim light filtering through the slats, Wells spotted a shape huddled in the corner of an empty stall. He approached slowly, peacemaker steady. "Who's there? Show yourself." The figure shifted, and moonlight through the high window illuminated the face of a young woman. Her lip was split, one eye swollen shut, and dried blood caked her temple. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing more bruises beneath. "Please," she whispered, her voice rough and desperate, "don't send me back to him." Wells holstered his gun and knelt, keeping a cautious distance. "Back to who, miss?" "Randall Drake." She shivered at the name. "My husband." The way she said husband, like it was a curse, told Wells everything he needed to know. He'd seen it before. Young women practically sold into marriage with men 2 or 3 times their age, treated more like property than people. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Sarah. Sarah Morgan, though he calls me Drake now." Wells nodded toward the house. "You can come inside. Get cleaned up. Tell me what happened." She flinched when he extended his hand, but eventually took it, rising unsteadily to her feet. Wells noted she couldn't be older than 22, with auburn hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Inside, Wells lit the lamps and put coffee on the stove while Sarah washed her face in the basin. When she sat at his table, hands wrapped around the steaming mug he'd provided, she looked marginally more human. "He bought me," she said bluntly, staring into her coffee. "My father lost our farm to drought last year. Drake offered him enough money to start over if he could have me. Called it marriage, but—" She trailed off, touching a finger to her split lip. "You ran," Wells observed. Sarah nodded. "He was drunk tonight, worse than usual. After he—" She touched her swollen eye. "I waited until he passed out, told him exactly what he wanted to hear, made him think I'd surrendered. Then I walked all night, saw your ranch from the ridge, and just hoped." Wells said nothing for a long moment, turning over his options. Harboring another man's wife, even under these circumstances, meant trouble. And with Blackwood already gunning for him, "Drake will come looking," he said finally. "I know." Her knuckles went white around the mug. "I know what I'm asking, mister. If you want me gone—" "Jackson," he interrupted. "Jackson Wells. And I didn't say that." He stood, wincing as his wounded shoulder protested. Sarah noticed immediately. "You're hurt." "Had worse." He moved to the window, peering out at the darkness. "Drake, powerful man, owns half the valley south of here, cattle mostly, has men who do his fighting for him." Wells nodded grimly. "And Blackwood, Victor Blackwood, you know if they're friendly?" "Partners," Sarah confirmed, her eyes hardening. "Drake moves Blackwood's cattle through his land. Blackwood supplies Drake with other things." Her voice dropped. "Women, whiskey, guns. They're cut from the same cloth." The pieces clicked together in Wells' mind. Blackwood wanted his gold mine. Drake wanted his wife back. Two powerful men with every reason to see Wells in the ground. Wells crossed to a cabinet and removed a wooden box. From it, he withdrew an older model Colt Navy revolver, checking its cylinder before placing it on the table. "Ever fired one of these?" he asked. Sarah stared at the weapon, then at Wells. "No. Time you learned." He sat across from her. "Because if you're staying, we're both going to need every bullet we can fire." For the first time since he'd found her, a spark lit in Sarah's eyes. Not fear, but resolve. Dawn broke, crisp and clear, over the Arizona desert. Wells stood in his yard with Sarah beside him, her delicate hands wrapped around the grip of his Colt Navy. "Steady," he instructed. "Breathe out as you pull the trigger. Don't jerk it." Sarah sighted down the barrel at the row of bottles Wells had set on the fence post 50 feet away. She squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hands, the shot going wide. Again, Wells said. You'll get the feel of it. On her fourth attempt, a bottle exploded into glittering shards. A small smile tugged at her lips. Good, Wells nodded. Now do it faster. In a real fight, you won't have time to aim pretty. They worked through the morning, Wells showing her how to load, how to clean the weapon, how to draw from a holster. She was a quick study, determined in a way that spoke of years spent surviving one way or another. It was nearly noon when Wells spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Get inside, he ordered, taking the Navy from her and replacing it with his peacemaker. Take this. Anyone comes through that door that ain't me, you shoot. Understand? Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. Wells moved quickly, gathering his Winchester rifle and extra ammunition from the house before positioning himself behind the stone wall that bordered his yard. The riders were clearer now, 4 men approaching at a steady pace. He recognized Randall Drake at the lead by his distinctive black hat and the silver conchos decorating his saddle. The riders pulled up 30 yards from the house. Drake was a big man, 50 or so, with a thick mustache and cold eyes. The 3 men flanking him were hard cases, gun hands hired for dirty work. Wells, Drake called. I know you're there. I just want what's mine. Wells kept his Winchester trained on Drake's chest. Nothing here belongs to you, Drake. Drake's laugh was ugly. My wife disagrees. She's my property, legal and proper. Hand her over and we'll ride away peaceful-like. She ain't property, Wells replied, and she ain't going anywhere she doesn't want to. One of Drake's men shifted, hand drifting toward his holster. Wells adjusted his aim slightly. Your man there twitches again. He's dead. Drake's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Wells. Blackwood told me about your little gold mine. Way I see it, you've got 2 things that don't belong to you. The girl and that deed. So there it was. Blackwood had connected the dots. Realized Wells would be returning with the Yellow Sky deed secured. Now he was using Drake as another angle of attack. Last chance, Wells, Drake called. The woman and the deed, or we burn you out. The front door of the cabin creaked. Wells risked a glance back to see Sarah standing there, the peacemaker firm in her hands. I ain't going back, she called, her voice carrying across the yard. Not ever. Drake's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little... His words were cut short as he drew his revolver. Wells fired first, his Winchester round catching one of Drake's men in the chest. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Wells worked the lever action of his rifle with practiced speed, each shot finding its mark. One of Drake's men fell from his saddle. Another took cover behind his horse. Drake himself wheeled his mount, firing wildly as he retreated. A bullet whined past Wells's ear. Another splintered the wall beside him. He felt rather than saw Sarah move up beside him, the peacemaker barking in her hands. Her shot caught the 3rd gunman in the leg, spinning him off his feet. Back inside, Wells shouted, but the order came too late. Drake, circling back, fired again. The bullet clipped Sarah's arm, tearing through her sleeve. She cried out but kept the pistol raised. Wells stood, exposing himself to take careful aim. His bullet found Drake's horse, sending the animal crashing to the ground, with Drake barely leaping free. The remaining gunman, seeing the odds turn, spurred his horse and fled. Drake scrambled for cover behind his fallen mount, trading shots with Wells until his revolver clicked empty. In the sudden silence, Wells approached cautiously, rifle trained on Drake's position. It's over, Drake. Throw out your gun and stand up slow. Instead, Drake bolted, sprinting for the cover of a nearby gully. Wells fired once, the bullet kicking up dirt at Drake's heels. Let him go, Sarah said, clutching her bleeding arm. He'll be back with more men. Wells lowered his rifle, watching Drake disappear into the distance. You're right about that. He turned to her. Let's get that arm looked at. Inside, Wells cleaned and bandaged Sarah's wound, a minor graze that had bled freely but would heal clean. His own shoulder throbbed with renewed intensity from the exertion. "Why?" Sarah asked as he tied off the bandage. "Why risk your life for someone you just met?" Wells was silent for a moment. He crossed to the mantel and took down a small wooden box. From it, he removed the photograph of his family. "Had a wife once, Emily, son named Samuel." His voice was rough. "Lost them both. After that, spent years just existing, not living." He looked up at her. "Some things a man can't walk away from. Drake, Blackwood, men like them take whatever they want because most folks are too scared to stand against them." He met her eyes. "I've done my share of walking away. Not this time." Sarah studied his face. "The mine they mentioned, is that what the shooting was about yesterday?" Wells nodded. "Yellow Sky, small claim up north. Found it 2 years back. Registered it proper. Turns out it's richer than anyone guessed. Blackwood's been trying to muscle in since word got out. So it's not just me they want." "No." Wells checked his ammunition, laying out cartridges on the table. "Which means they'll hit harder next time. Drake's pride is hurt, and Blackwood wants that deed." He glanced at her. "You still want to learn to shoot?" Sarah picked up the peacemaker, checking it the way he'd shown her. "Show me again. Everything." Tombstone was alive with midday activity when Wells and Sarah rode in the next morning. Wells had considered leaving Sarah at the ranch, but decided keeping her close was safer. Besides, she'd proven herself handy with a gun. They tied their horses outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mason was a grizzled man in his 50s, a former cavalry officer like Wells, though they'd fought on opposite sides of the war between the states. "Jackson," Mason greeted him without warmth. "Heard you've been stirring up trouble." Wells matched his tone. "Funny. I heard trouble came looking for me." Mason's eyes shifted to Sarah, noting her bruised face. "This would be Drake's wife, I take it." "My name is Sarah Morgan," she said firmly. Mason sighed, leaning back in his chair. "What do you want, Wells?" "Drake and Blackwood are planning to hit my ranch. 20 men, maybe more. I need deputies." Mason laughed without humor. "You're asking me to deputize men to fight Drake and Blackwood, the two largest landowners in the county? Men who, between them, employ half the town?" "I'm asking you to uphold the law," Wells countered. "Drake beat his wife. Blackwood sent men to kill me for my property. And you can prove this how?" Mason stood, moving to the window. "Drake's story is that his young wife ran off, possibly stolen. Blackwood claims you jumped his men who were peacefully traveling." Wells studied the sheriff's face. "You're not going to help." "Can't," Mason corrected. "Won't risk this town in your personal war." He turned back. "My advice? Sell that mine claim to Blackwood. Let Drake have his wife back. Ride out with your life." Sarah stiffened beside Wells. He placed a hand on her arm, steadying her. "Then we're done here," Wells said coldly, turning to leave. As they reached the door, Mason called after them. "Hold up, Wells." His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. "Not everything is as it seems. Watch yourself in town today." Wells paused, noting the way Mason's eyes darted to the window, as if checking who might be watching. The sheriff's face showed a flicker of something. Doubt, maybe even shame. Then it was gone, replaced by his official mask. "Good day to you both," Mason said loudly, for the benefit of anyone listening. Outside, Sarah's hands were shaking with anger. He knows. He knows what Drake did to me." "Maybe," Wells said thoughtfully, "but something else is going on here." They walked down the dusty main street toward the saloon. Wells needed information, which men in town might stand against Drake and Blackwood. The Red Spur Saloon fell quiet as they entered, faces turning to stare. Wells guided Sarah to a corner table, positioning himself with his back to the wall. facing the room. The whiskey was poor, but it took the edge off his darkening mood. He'd spotted two of Drake's men at the bar, watching them with undisguised hostility. When they finally made their move, pushing away from the bar with hands hovering near their holsters, Wells was ready. "The boss wants a word with you, Wells," the taller one said, "and the woman comes with us." Wells didn't rise. "Your boss can come himself if he wants to talk." "Ain't asking." The man reached for Sarah's arm. Wells moved with practiced efficiency. His boot caught the man's ankle as his fist connected with the gunman's throat. The man crashed backward into a table, gasping. The second drew his gun, but Wells was already in motion, closing the distance and driving the heel of his palm into the man's nose. The crunch of cartilage was followed by a spray of blood. Wells twisted the gun from the man's grasp and pressed it against his temple. "Anyone else work for Drake or Blackwood?" Wells asked the suddenly silent room. "Step up now and save us all some time." A chair scraped back as a tall, lean Mexican man stood, mustache framing a smile. "I work for myself, amigo, and I enjoy watching Drake's dogs get kicked." He approached, hand extended. "Miguel Rodriguez, but friends call me Ryder." Wells lowered the gun but remained wary. "What's your stake in this, Rodriguez?" "Drake rustled 40 head of my cattle last spring. Sheriff did nothing." Rodriguez shrugged expressively. "A man remembers such things." From near the door, another man spoke. "I got no love for Blackwood neither." He was massive, dark skin, with arms like oak branches. "Name's Michael Washington. Most call me Big Mike. Blackwood tried to run me out when I opened my smithy. Said the town didn't need a black man's business." Wells assessed both men. Rodriguez had the lean, weathered look of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Big Mike's hands showed the calluses of his trade, but the way he carried himself suggested he knew how to handle trouble. "I'm going back to my ranch," Wells told them. "Drake and Blackwood are bringing an army. If you're thinking of helping, know what you're signing up for." Big Mike's laugh was deep and rolling. 20 men, you said? Well, they'll need shoeing after if any survive." Rodriguez grinned. "I've always preferred unfair fights, especially when I'm on the unfair side." As they discussed plans, the saloon doors burst open. A young boy rushed in, breathless. "Mr. Wells, Ryder's coming. Sheriff Mason's with him." Wells moved quickly to the window. Outside, Mason was riding alongside a well-dressed man, Wells recognized as Victor Blackwood. Behind them came 10 armed men. "Back door," Rodriguez suggested. "Our horses are behind the smithy." Wells nodded to Sarah. "Go with them. I'll catch up." "Jackson," she began. "Trust me," he said, looking into her eyes. "I'll be right behind you." The ride back to the ranch was tense. Halfway there, shots rang out from a ridge above the trail. Wells felt a bullet tug at his coat sleeve as he pulled Sarah down behind a boulder. Rodriguez and Big Mike took cover behind their horses. "Ambush!" Rodriguez called, returning fire with his rifle. Wells spotted 3 shooters on the ridge. "Sarah, stay down. Mike, circle left. Rodriguez, give me covering fire." The next 2 minutes were a blur of gunfire and dust. Wells worked his way up the slope, using rocks and scrub for cover. One of the ambushers rose to get a better shot at Rodriguez. Wells' bullet took him in the chest. By the time it was over, 2 ambushers lay dead. The third had fled, leaving a blood trail that disappeared into the rocks. "They knew we'd take this trail," Wells said grimly as they regrouped. "Someone in town talked." "Or someone's been watching your place," Rodriguez suggested. "Might have a spy closer than you think." The thought was troubling. Wells checked their horses for injury, finding only a minor graze on Rodriguez's mount. "Let's move. We need to prepare." By nightfall, Wells' ranch had been transformed into a fortress. Rodriguez directed the construction of defensive positions using hay bales, wagons, and furniture. Big Mike had brought a wagon load of supplies from his smithy, caltrops to slow-mounted attackers, lengths of chain, and extra ammunition. As they worked, Wells kept thinking about Mason's warning in the ambush. Something wasn't adding up. "You trust these men?" Sarah asked quietly as they stacked sandbags against the barn wall. Wells watched Rodriguez expertly laying traps along the likely approach routes. "Not completely, but they hate Drake and Blackwood as much as we do. That'll have to be enough." Later, while Rodriguez and Big Mike slept, Wells sat alone on his porch, watching the stars. Sarah's soft footsteps approached from behind. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. She sat beside him. "Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what happens if we lose." Wells was silent for a long moment. "When I came west," he finally said, "I was running from memories. Thought if I just kept moving, they couldn't catch me." He looked at her. "After I lost Emily and Samuel, I nearly ate my gun one night. Had it in my mouth, finger on the trigger." He paused. "Something stopped me. Some stubborn piece that wouldn't surrender." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because some things you can't outrun. Some fights choose you." He gestured to the land around them. "This place, it's not much, but it's the first thing that felt like home in a long time." His voice hardened. "Blackwood, Drake, men who take what isn't theirs because they can. Someone has to stand against them." Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing for me too." Morning broke clear and cold. Wells stood on the ridge behind his house, surveying the approaches. Rodriguez joined him, rifle cradled in his arms. "They come early," the Mexican observed, pointing to dust clouds on the horizon. "Maybe 30 riders." Wells wasn't surprised. Blackwood never intended to negotiate. "Take your position. I'll signal when." Inside, Sarah was checking her weapons, the carbine and peacemaker Wells had given her. Her hands were steady, her expression determined. Big Mike was positioning the last of his improvised defenses, sharpened stakes driven into the ground to funnel attackers into their field of fire. "Ready?" Wells asked them. Big Mike hefted a massive shotgun. "Born ready." Sarah simply nodded, a new steel in her eyes that hadn't been there days before. Wells took his position behind a low stone wall with clear sight lines to the approaching riders. Through his spyglass, he could make out Blackwood and Drake riding side by side. Mason was with them, his expression unreadable. The riders halted just beyond rifle range. Blackwood, Drake, and Mason rode forward with 4 gunmen flanking them. "Wells," Drake shouted, "send out my wife and the deed. This is your last chance." "Told Blackwood noon," Wells called back. "He's early." Blackwood's voice carried across the yard, smooth as silk. "I'm afraid I've had a change of plans, Mr. Wells. Business elsewhere demands my attention, so we'll conclude our transaction now." "No transaction," Wells replied. "This land is mine. The lady makes her own choices. You want either, come take them." Drake's face contorted with rage. "Kill him! Kill them all!" The attack came like a thunderstorm. Riders charged forward, guns blazing. Wells' first shot took Drake's hat off. His second caught one of the flanking gunmen in the chest. Rodriguez's sharps boomed from the ridge, the heavy buffalo gun dropping horses and men with devastating efficiency. Big Mike rose from behind a wagon, his shotgun belching fire and smoke. Sarah, positioned at a window, worked the Winchester carbine with surprising skill, each shot deliberate and effective. The first wave of attackers fell back in disarray, leaving dead and wounded scattered across the yard. Blackwood, who had remained safely behind, sent a second group forward on foot, using the chaos as cover to approach the house from multiple angles. Then from the north, unexpected gunfire erupted. Wells feared reinforcements for Blackwood, but instead the new arrivals were firing into the backs of the attackers. Through the smoke, Wells glimpsed Sheriff Mason leading a group of townspeople. The tide turned swiftly. Caught between defenders and Mason's group, Many of Blackwood's hired guns threw down their weapons. Others fled. Drake, seeing the battle lost, spurred his horse toward the open country. "Rodriguez!" Wells shouted. "Drake's running!" The Mexican sharps cracked, but the shot went wide. Drake disappeared into a ravine, escaping. Blackwood, however, stood his ground, emptying his revolver at the house even as his men surrendered around him. His last bullet shattered the window frame inches from Wells's head. In the sudden silence that followed, Wells stepped into the open, rifle trained on Blackwood. "It's over," he said. Blackwood's aristocratic features twisted with hatred. "You think this ends here? A man like you, against a man like me?" "Ends today," Wells confirmed, closing the distance between them. Blackwood reached for a hidden derringer. Wells saw the movement and fired once. Blackwood staggered, clutching his chest, disbelief in his eyes as he fell. Mason approached, his own gun still drawn. "Hold up there. Wells?" Wells turned slowly, rifle lowered but ready. "Sheriff, didn't expect to see you on this side of the fight." Mason looked troubled. "Blackwood went too far. Tried to deputize his gunmen last night, take over the town." He gestured to the townspeople with him. Folks didn't take kindly to that. From the porch, Sarah called out in warning. Wells spun to see Drake charging from where he'd circled back, revolver blazing. Before Wells could raise his rifle, Sarah's Winchester cracked. Drake jerked in the saddle, fired one wild shot into the air, then toppled to the ground. In the aftermath, Wells surveyed the damage to his ranch. Buildings riddled with bullets, fences destroyed, livestock scattered. But they had won. Against impossible odds, they had stood their ground. Mason approached Wells as his men rounded up the surviving attackers. Found papers on Blackwood. Been falsifying deeds, bribing officials. Drake, too. Been working together to push out smaller ranchers for years. He looked genuinely apologetic. "Should have seen it sooner." Wells said nothing, just nodded once. "What'll you do now?" Mason asked. "That mine of yours is still worth a fortune." Wells looked to where Sarah stood with Rodriguez and Big Mike. "Got some ideas about that." The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the desert in gold and crimson. Wells sat on his newly repaired porch, watching the light fade. Sarah joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Riders coming," she noted, nodding toward a dust cloud approaching from town. Wells recognized Rodriguez and Big Mike as they neared. Both men dismounted, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. "Everything settled in town?" Wells asked. Rodriguez nodded. "Judge signed the papers this morning. The Yellow Sky Mining Company now officially belongs to the 4 of us. Equal shares." Big Mike grinned. "Already hired 6 men to start work. That vein's as rich as they claimed." Wells sipped his coffee. "And Drake's land?" "Court awarded it to Sarah as compensation," Rodriguez reported, "along with his other properties. The lady is now one of the largest landowners in the territory." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "Still doesn't seem real." "What will you do with it?" Big Mike asked her. She considered for a moment. "Sell most of it. Use the money to help other women in similar situations." She glanced at Wells. "Keep enough to build something new." The 4 sat in companionable silence as darkness claimed the land. Finally, Rodriguez stood. "We should return to town. Much work tomorrow." He clasped Wells's hand. "You coming?" Wells shook his head. "Got cattle to tend. I'll ride in next week." After the men departed, Sarah remained on the porch beside Wells. The stars emerged one by one in the vast Arizona sky. "You could live in town now," Wells said quietly. "Nice house, people around." "Could," she agreed. "Or I could stay here, if that offer still stands." Wells turned to her. "Life out here isn't easy." "Never expected easy," she replied. "Just free." Wells nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Someone once asked me what life's about. Told them it's not about what you run from. He took her hand. It's about what you're willing to stay for. Sarah smiled, her first genuine smile since he'd met her. Right here, right now, she said softly. Right here, Wells agreed, his voice stronger than it had been in years. There are things worth fighting for, Sarah. There are places worth calling home. And right here, right now, we've found both. As the night deepened around them, a rider approached from the distance. Wells tensed, hand dropping to his gun. The rider stopped at the edge of the yard, hat raised in greeting. Wells, got a message for you. Wells approached cautiously. The man extended a sealed envelope. From Colonel Hargrove up in Colorado. Says there's trouble at his silver mine. Asked for you specifically. Wells took the envelope, thanked the messenger, and returned to the porch. Sarah watched his face as he read. Trouble? She asked. Wells folded the letter. Always is. He glanced at her. Got friends up north. Need help. Sarah picked up the peacemaker, checking its chambers with practiced ease. When do we leave? Wells looked at her with newfound respect. First light. He settled back in his chair, eyes on the horizon. Seems we've got more work to do. The night wrapped around them like a promise, stars bearing witness to the beginning of something new. Not just survival anymore, but a life worth fighting for. The fire crackles in the background as I set down my coffee mug. Well, friends, that's the tale of Jackson Wells and the blood trail on Wildland. A man who found something worth fighting for when he'd thought those days were behind him. You know, back in those frontier days, a man's word and his courage were often all he had. No courts to settle every dispute, no phones to call for help, just grit, determination, and maybe a trusted peacemaker at your side. Pauses, looks into the distance. I've been telling these frontier stories for over 40 years now, and I'm always struck by how they remind us of what matters. Honor, protecting those who can't protect themselves. Standing your ground when it would be easier to run. Leans forward, more intimate tone. If this story spoke to you today, I'd sure appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and ringing that bell. Each week, we gather around this digital campfire for another tale from America's wild frontier. Next time, we'll follow the story of a stagecoach driver facing down the most notorious road agents in Colorado territory. Picks up coffee mug. Now, before you go, I'm mighty curious. Where are you listening from today? What time is it in your part of the world? Drop a comment below and let me know. Maybe share a story about a time you had to stand your ground when others would have folded. This is Samuel Garrett with Wild West Chronicles, reminding you that the spirit of the frontier lives on in all of us who refuse to back down from what's right. Until next time, partners, sound of coffee mug being set down.